Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 208. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Stephen Watts, who writes under the pen name S.R. Watts, as well as actor and narrator Preston Geer. We'll discuss their audiobook collaboration for Stephen's new novel, The Celestial Flame. This is book one in the Divine Saga, a 5-part sweeping epic that combines both fantasy and science fiction, and is filled with familial dynasties, political drama, and intergalactic war. Stephen's motivation for writing The Celestial Flame and the Divine Saga series was the desire to write something that might help people find some relief from anxiety, depression, and trauma, much like his favorite fantasy books did for him when he was young, books such as Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. And Preston Geer worked hard to bring The Celestial Flame to life. Performing the audiobook narration for such a novel was not an easy task, but Stephen provided Preston with copious amounts of notes and pronunciation guides to ensure that the narration is as true a translation of the author's vision as possible. In this episode, I'll chat with Stephen and Preston about their writing and performing journeys, their individual takes on some of the main characters in The Celestial Flame, and Stephen's plans for the rest of the series, as well as a few other things coming up. Stephen Watts and Preston Geer, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about, Stephen, your new book, The Celestial Flame. It's book one of the Divine Saga. And Preston, you have narrated for the audiobook. So what I want to do is talk first to Stephen. Can you tell us a little bit about this book, set it up for us? And in particular, I'm curious what the inspiration was for writing it.
Certainly. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about the story itself. So The Celestial Flame, it tells the story of a young man named Horias, who is 16 years old and born to an ancient race of winged humans called Archaeans. And when we first meet Horias, we learn that he is struggling to overcome the trauma he experienced during a war that nearly destroyed his people living in the Archaean Republic. And this war was brought on by a radical Archaean faction known as the Imperialists, who sought to replace the Republic's free government with an authoritarian regime. Horias thinks he can overcome the trauma by joining a mystical order known as the Xenarchs, hoping that their teachings of spirituality and their connections with the divine will help him find peace in the aftermath of the war and amid the reconstruction of his people. But when it's discovered that the Imperialists have joined forces with the Sovereign, who are a totalitarian nation of technologically advanced humans known as Nazites, he fears that they will finally have the means to build the war machines capable of overrunning the Republic's mountain stronghold, giving them the power to enslave him and his people. And this sends Horias into a deep depression until one day, the head of the Xenarch Order calls on Horias to become the next guardian of a sacred key, one of 4 with the power to unlock a portal to a cosmic realm leading back to the presence of the divine. And believing the legends surrounding the untold blessings that awaits humanity in the realm of the divine, Horias vows to master what the Xenarchs dub the true art of prayer, so that they may wield the divine powers of the divine, and known as the Celestial Flame, in the key's defense against those who would try to destroy it. But this proves to be more difficult than he imagined, because when he's called to a mission to the Nazite realm, it brings him face to face with many trials that threaten to hinder his ability to connect with the divine, which is a prerequisite to wielding the flame and being able to master the true art of prayer. And before long, he finds himself in a race against time to uncover the truth behind the key's real power before he is discovered by mysterious adversaries who will stop at nothing to destroy the key in their quest to afford dominion over all. And that's basically just the basic setup of the story. I have to say there's a lot that went into this story. There's a lot of inspiration behind it, but the biggest inspiration behind it is that ever since I was young, I've always wanted to create a story that help people overcome trauma or depression or anxiety in the same way that some of my favorite fantasy novels had helped me overcome trauma and depression and anxiety. I can remember when I read Lord of the Rings as a boy, and it was like one of those stories that allowed me to escape into a world where I got to see heroes who overcame many difficult trials to become great masters and great heroes of their realm. And it even became much more prevalent to me when I saw the movies in high school. So I wanted to do something where I could create something just as wonderful and something that is just as magical for other people. And I especially wanted to create something that was unique, that would stand out from other traditional fantasy novels.
I was going to say when I first read I mean, it's fantasy sci-fi, so I definitely got Dune vibes from it. I got Game of Thrones, although a little bit, it's not as mature as Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is for a very adult audience,
Right.
but it's more young adult friendly. And but you have the political factions, you have the familial dynasties, and then there's just this intergalactic war going on between all these different families. And we never discussed this. I don't know if Horias's race of people, if the Archaeans,
Yeah.
are they humans in the future, or are they? It's kind of like Star Wars, where it's a
Right.
galaxy far, far away.
Yeah.
We never
Well,
really discussed it, which is kind of cool.
right. Well, basically, the Archaeans are just an ancient race of humans that were gifted by the divine with wings like angels. So they
Right.
are like an angel-like race that stand out from other humans who don't have wings, like the Nazites. But also, what makes them stand apart is that they are committed to their ancient traditions. They're committed to their preserving their way of life in the more arcane sense, and they find that's being harder and harder to hold on to those traditions as Nazite influence begins to spread throughout the world. And like some factions like the imperialists are trying to spread that influence into the republic. And so yeah, it's just basically a juxtaposition between holding on to ancient traditions versus technological progress and the blessings and the tragedies that can come from those kind of things.
Yeah, and the Archaeans are definitely in the minority when it comes to the power, right? The Nazites have the majority of the power in this universe. Their technology is taken over, and the Archaeans are becoming a smaller and smaller faction. They still have power. I mean, they still hold political power,
Yeah.
but the Archaeans are definitely the underdog in the
Right.
story.
In fact, the only thing that's keeping them from completely being annihilated is the fact that their nation's protected by a massive mountain range that surrounds them on all sides of their realm. And if the Nazites can figure out a way to overcome that barrier, because they right now they don't have the secrets of flight at the start of the story, but if they can figure that out, then they can create the war machines necessary to conquer the entire realm and just destroy the Republic.
Right. The Archaeans are fighting against their extinction.
If fight,
Yeah.
fighting through the right to exist.
Yep.
So let's talk about world building, because I'm curious from each of your perspectives how that played out with this story. So Stephen, in your mind, you must have had a clear vision of what things looked like, where things were positioned, how people acted, what was necessary to build this world. I mean, it was your creation, so all this came from you. Preston, you had to sort of interpret what it was that Stephen was trying to convey. So Preston, I'd like to start with you. When you read the story and you were imagining things, it seems to me this is a very big world, galaxy, universe, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
Was it hard to kind of get your arms around this in order to narrate it?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge with any fantasy or sci-fi, I mean, on a technical side, there's the name pronunciations, which Steven sent me a list of all the pronunciations, and he actually sent me a character list. I mean, I'm looking at it now. There's a character list, there's a relics name, because there's so many different elements that belong in this world, this universe that he created.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest challenge with sci-fi is name pronunciations, accents. We don't really we don't know what the accents are because they're in a different galaxy, right? So we don't really know. So that's the biggest challenge. That being said, though, the way Stephen writes, it's so visual that it became very clear reading it. The first chapter alone, you realize the Archaeans, they have, like you said, these angel-like wings, and everything's so visual, which is great for me as a reader and as a narrator, because I could just kind of step back and let the listener visualize this world. I didn't have to oversell anything. So it was really easy in the sense I could just tell the story. And I hope the listeners are able to just visualize this massive creation that Stephen created. So yeah, I think the biggest challenges are the name pronunciations. What voices do we do for certain characters, which Stephen was hands-on with that as well. I'd send him samples and he was on board with most of them. I think maybe, I don't know, there's a handful of characters that he gave very specific notes. And I think not only visually did he have a specific idea in mind, but I think also audibly, he knew what he wanted the characters to sound like. And that made it very easy for me too, because I didn't have to guess. Once we agreed on the voices for the characters and we had those locked in, I could just, again, sit back and just narrate. It all became very clear with Stephen's guidance. We just kind of, we went back and forth, maybe on like, there's 2 or 3 characters we went back and forth maybe 3 or 4 times till we got it right. But once we had that, we were good. It was really kind of smooth sailing for the audio production.
Yeah. And is that usual? Is it usual to get that much clear guidance, that detailed a cheat sheet up front?
No, which is no, and not almost never. Like I usually work with the publishers, and if I'm working with publishers, I can send them a pronunciation guide, which they'll refer to the author and get back to me. But then it's putting more work on me to have to find what words I need to pronounce, and it depends on the publisher. Some publishers will give you all the details up front. Most of them will. It's on you as the narrator to go through the entire manuscript, find the words, find the names, and then send them a list. But Stephen provided that right up front. And not only did he provide the pronunciation guide, he gave me backstories on everyone. He gave me locations and like any name that was a foreign name that he made up. I knew he had a phonetic guide too of how to pronounce it as well. And then, he was just hands-on from the get-go. And so, but that's not very common. Usually if I'm working with a publisher, they give me the manuscript and they just say, all right,
good luck.
Here's your good luck. Here's your deadline. Goodbye. Which can be a lot of work for fantasy, especially. Fantasy and sci-fi can be really challenging to read out loud.
So, Stephen, how close did Preston get to what you had in mind?
Well, I listened to the whole audiobook as it came in, and yes, there were some times when I had to ask because I had to ask for quick edits and fixes because it didn't quite mesh up with my vision. But like 99% of the time, he was pretty spot on with what I had envisioned, especially after I gave him the notes early on and gave him the feedback that he was looking for when it came to how the voices should sound and how the name pronunciations should sound. And so overall, I was very pleased with the end product that Preston produced, because it certainly, I certainly would not, I don't think I would have gotten that level of quality from and most other narrators that I would have worked with.
And so what was it like to hear this book? Because it's one thing to write it for yourself, right, and have what's in your mind put down on the page. It's another step to have someone else read it, say an editor or a beta reader. It's another step farther to publish it in electronic form or print form and send it into the world. And yet one more to have someone bring it to life with their voice. So what was that like?
I have to say it was pretty exhilarating. Yes, reading it is one thing and listening to it is completely different thing. And the experience differs depending on which narrator you choose. And I have to be honest, before I found Preston to narrate my book, I had actually been spending a year trying to find the right narrator. And I think I'd gone over like 20 or 30 different narrators, and I asked them to send their auditions and like to read a passage from the book and send me an audition. And Preston was the first one that came back to me where I felt like, this is the guy I think has the right voice. He has the right skills to actually pull this off. And so when he agreed to work with me and take on the project, I felt like I had struck gold. I had struck pay dirt because he he really was on top of everything from the get-go, and he was always quick to respond. And when he was finished, I mean, listening to the whole narration, it just felt like my story came to life for the first time, and it was a wonderful thing to just like know that I finally have a format for my book, a type, a version of my book where the actual character names are pronounced the way I imagined it, to have the voices that I imagined for the character the way I had imagined it, and to actually I see the story come to life in my head as I am listening to it being played through the earphones in my ear. So it would just it's just there's no other way to explain it except that it was just like a dream come true.
What an honor. That was a huge compliment. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Took you a year to connect with me.
Yeah.
So, Preston, how much of your training as an actor did you draw on to read Stephen's book? I mean,
Yeah.
do you find yourself drawing on it normally when you recite just any book that you read, or is there something about sci-fi and fantasy that requires more or less?
That's a great question. I think that acting definitely plays a huge part in any kind of performance. But long form narration is so different than any other form of acting, even in any other form of voiceover. Because even if you're working on a video game or you're working in animation, you have time to go over the script multiple times. You might even be off book by the time you get into the recording session. Not always with voiceover, because that's the huge benefit of voiceover. You can have the script in front of you. But with audiobooks, because you'll never be off book, you're never going to memorize everything. You really have to just read it first, understand the world you're getting yourself into, and then just let it rip. And that is really, quite frankly, terrifying as an actor, because you just don't have the time to over prepare. And so once you get in, it's exciting and it's scary, because when you get into the recording process, you're really just going off your first instinct most of the time. Sometimes you'll read a sentence or you'll read a piece of dialogue and you'll think, oh, I'm way off the mark. I'll go back, and you just have to scale back and re-record it. But most of the time, you're going off of your first instinct, and that can be surprising once you start the recording phase. And I think that's one thing you get when you're acting on set, because you can prepare, you could have like a one-page scene and be in a TV show or a feature film, and you'll over prepare it, and then you get on set and it's nothing like you prepared. So when it comes to audiobooks, again, it's scary to not feel like to walk into something where you feel like you haven't memorized it, you haven't made all of your choices necessarily. But it's also exciting that you can start recording and surprise yourself, because you just have to go with whatever your first instinct is most of the time, because we don't have the time to do 20 takes of each line until we get it right. And so I think the thing about acting is it's more subconscious when you start performing an audiobook. It's just what you have to just trust your instincts as an actor. And so much of that is on a subconscious level, because if you get too cerebral about it and you start overthinking every which way to read a line, or the voices of the characters, if you get in your head too much about that, you're just going to stumble and fall through the whole book, and then it's not fun. And then the whole book becomes a bit of a labor. And you don't want to do that as an actor. The whole reason we got into acting is because it's fun. And so, yeah, I think acting definitely is important. It's also important for your vocal health too. You just have to learn how to control your voice and protect your voice. Long form narration, again, is so different, because I mean, if you're on stage, you are projecting, right? You're having to dig deep and use your diaphragm and project. When you're in the microphone, this microphone's 4 inches away from my mouth. I'm not projecting at all. It's almost like I'm telling the story into someone's ear who's less than a foot away from me. So it's so different, but I love it, because again, I think the best thing about audiobooks is because you really cannot over prepare. You have to just trust your instincts and see what happens. And that's kind of exciting.
Let's talk about a few of the main characters. Stephen, what I'd like for you to do maybe is walk us through a couple of the characters. Tell us a little bit about them, your thoughts on them, your intentions, maybe a little bit about what happens to them in the story. And then, Preston, I'd like to get your impressions of them when you read them for the first time, what you thought. And then once you were actually portraying them, did that change at all, or did you get feedback and have to adjust? So, Stephen, can you pick maybe 2 or 3, and let's kind of go through each one, if that's all right.
Sure thing. So the first character is obviously the protagonist, Horias. He was the character that basically is the center of the entire story. He's the one that we are on this hero's journeys with. And he's the one who is basically trying to find peace in a world that is just spinning completely out of control. He lost his mother during the war. It was something that haunted him throughout his youth. And as he struggled to learn to put the past behind him and learn to trust more in the divine. And it's something I feel like that a lot of people can relate to. Maybe if they haven't lost a parent, they know what it's like to feel absolutely powerless, to not be able to control the world around them. And it's just one of those characters where I feel like readers will be able to root for, because he's learning to trust not only in a higher power, but to learn that, there's something about himself that they saw in him, that they trust him with this great task of protecting this key that will one day help lead many to a better place in a world outside of their own chaotic one. So I think he's the one that is going to be the most interesting to watch.
Preston, what were your impressions of him?
Of Horias?
Yeah.
I mean, again, I go back to the visual. It's such a cool idea to introduce a character who has these wings. And I think just having this reluctant hero, which Horias is, I was enthralled by the visual. And then I was just intrigued by this push-pull dynamic between his family and the first chapter, or the first 2 chapters, there's just so much drama. You get the political drama, you see the desolation of, or I should say the aftermath of, the Nazites' attack on the Archaeans. And so you get this sense of this like spiritual element of Horias' people that has this sense of optimism in the face of this repression. They seem like a very repressed people. And even though Horias' father is a huge political leader, I believe he's the chancellor, correct?
He is, yeah.
Okay. It's been a little while since I narrated this book. But even though his family has power, you get the sense that they're such an underdog in this world. The Nazites are just, they always have them on, the Nazites always have the Archaeans on their heels. And it's always fun to play underdogs, right? Because who wants to see the main character who has all the power in the world, and they have no struggles, they have no adversity whatsoever. So that was very interesting. And then, but even amongst Horias' own people, he's very frustrated because he sees the Archaeans just giving too much ground to the Nazites. And he's a teenager, he wants to fight, he has this energy, he has this idyllic perspective of sacrifice and self-sacrifice for the better of the people, and he has these younger ideals, whereas the older characters are much more, dare I say, realistic, or should I say they have more to lose. So they are having to play more of the political game because they're trying to protect their people. I mean, Horias' father has to protect his children. And so it's a very complicated world. And again, I think that's what's so great about having Horias and his friend Jesram and several other younger characters. They're the ones who have the energy and the motivation to fight back against this repression. But then you have the older characters who are, some of them are veterans of this previous war with the Nazites, and they're both defeated from their loss against the Nazites, but they're also just more realistic in the sense that you have to live in this new world. And that creates this sense, and again, I think there's just so much push and pull between these characters who are so, they're just defeated. And then there's the characters who are just really wanting to fight for a better world. And then there's the characters who just think, well, this this world's as good as it's going to get, so we have to live with people we hate. We have to live amongst our enemies. It's a very long answer about Horias.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, the thing I loved about your answer, Preston, is that you touched a little bit on Jezrum's character, is that he kind of represents that optimism that him and younger people of faith in his community represent, that they just have to press on and they have to they are trying to be more optimistic about the future, especially if they are committed to their beliefs in the Zenarch order. And I won't go into too much detail about Justin, but basically he's kind of like the opposite of Horias, where he's more optimistic. He has more hope for the future. But there's one other character I want to touch on. It's a Nazite character, and her name is Alessandra, and she's the main love interest of the story for Horias, and she is the princess of a Nazite kingdom, and who's basically the kingdom that the Republic is trying to ally itself with in the story to try and basically repel the future invasion from the Sovereign and the Imperialists. And when I won't spoil in many details about how they meet, but when they finally do meet, Horias finds that this princess is she's resourceful, she's smart, she is brave, she has a lot of like intuition about what it means to be there for people and to be self-sacrificing. She's gives up a lot of her own comforts as a royal to help fight for a lost cause that ultimately makes Horias fall in love with her, because she just basically embodies all the good qualities of the Nazite people, who basically they've given up on faith for the most part, because they've trusted more in intellect and in technology. So they feel like that faith is a archaic or a term that's so old that it is not worth thinking about. But he sees the confidence inside of her that he desperately wishes to have inside himself, and so she sees something in him, that a mystery that really draws him to herself. Basically the fact that he has a faith in some greater than himself, and the fact that she has confidence in herself, those are two things that bring them close together. And I think that's an interesting dynamic for the kind of relationship that I think exemplifies the kind of character that Alessandra is, and the kind of people that she represents in the Nazite realm. And the one thing I want to touch on about her character is that she was the one character I think I gave the most headaches to Preston about, because we had actually agreed on a voice for her. And then we got like 2 chapters into it when I realized, this is actually not what I wanted for her voice. So I asked Preston to come up with a few more examples, and I gave him some guide points. Finally came up with one, and then we had to record those lines. But overall, I was really happy with the new voice we came up with. And so I'll let Preston take from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's always so hard to do female voices too as a male narrator. Personally, I think female narrators do male voices better than male narrators can do female voices. It's just so hard because, and I'll be honest, I still struggle with it. I've never quite cracked that code of how to do I'll never be able to do a convincing female voice, but it's just more of the energy behind it. And yeah, I think we recorded like 2 or 3 chapters with Alessandra, and like you said, we had agreed to a voice. We recorded it, and then you were kind of like, yeah, you know what? It's not working. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
So we went back and we re-recorded it, which was fine. And I mean, I think that it ended up being it was overall for the best. You just, again, as a male narrator, it's so tough to do a female voice, and especially a teenage girl. I just naturally have a deeper voice, and so to have to you don't want to do a caricature, you don't want to do, which I think is what we did initially. I just went really, really high with my voice or whatever I did. I forget. Right. But then you were like, scale it back, and it ended up becoming closer to my resting voice, but it was just a softer voice. It didn't have the gravel of the older characters, so that had that older gruffy kind of voice.
Right.
And it wasn't like a teenage boy. It was just more of a softer, maybe slightly higher pitched voice. Yeah, once it's more about the personality, right? That's the thing. It's like the quality of the voice is one thing, but once you know the personality of the character, you understand their perspective, you can kind of embody that character, put yourself in their shoes, then it becomes a lot easier to just inhabit that character just briefly, and then you'll code switch and go to the other character, and then go to the narrative voice. But yeah, I thought she was a great character, and she also shows up fairly late in the book. I mean, she's probably about midway through the book, and so, but then she becomes a huge character. Yeah, and her dad is is the High King Xander,
Yeah.
who is the ruler of the Nazite realm. And so yeah, you have Horias and Alessandra, who are both children of these political dynasties.
Yeah.
Alessandra's a princess, whereas Horias is the son of a chancellor. They're both part of a political family on opposite sides.
Yeah. And certainly will show I mean, especially as the story continues beyond book one, we'll see how their dynamic comes together and creates an interesting like view on like how these two dynasties see each other, and even how their two worldviews can even shape not only their relationship, but the course of their people's entire destiny.
What's the plan for the series going forward? Because this is book one.
Right.
What do you have planned?
Yeah. So this is book one of the Divine Saga, and I'm currently in the process of writing the next four books, which is basically a 5 book series. So I have books 2, 3, and 4 at various stages of completion already written out, and book 5 is currently in the outlining stages. I'm getting ready to start writing the rough draft for that, but it's something I've been working on for over 20 years to try and really think out, like figure it out at how it's going to really work at the story, how the story elements are going to play off each other. Because I know that some authors tend to start a series not knowing where it's going to go, and they kind of write themselves into a corner. I'm trying to avoid that, so that's why I'm taking all this time to really plan out everything before I commit myself to writing a set number of books.
And so it sounds like you're going to be busy for a while.
Yes, I'll be quite busy for a while.
How long did it take you to write the first one?
So I finally wrote the first draft of this book about 11 years ago, and it took me 10 years after that to finally get it to where it is now.
So hopefully 2, 3, 4, and 5 should
They'll be short. No, they'll be shorter. No, the first book serves as the foundation for the rest of the series. So it was important to me to make sure that this book I got it right before. Then once it was done and I had all the other elements figured out, then that's when I can start going warp speed with the others, and hopefully maybe 1-2 years for each next book in the series.
Right. And do you have plans for beyond, once the series is done? Do you think about what else you might write after the series, or are you just focused on finishing this?
So I have lots of other plans for other books. I have this idea for a sci-fi trilogy. I won't get into detail right now, but it has a unique premise to it that tries to incorporate some spiritual elements to it, but in a more like kind of more like on the lines of, have you ever seen Deep Space Nine from Star Trek? It kind of has a similar setup to that, but it's anyway, I won't bore you with the details right now, but I have a lot of like ideas for how I'm going to write. So I do plan to continue writing as long after I finish the series, but right now this series is the main focus of my time and my energy.
Okay. And Preston, how about you? Works in progress, plans, goings on, that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, always. I mean, I usually narrate a book a week. I mostly work in romance, which is such a different thing from the
A little
Celestial
different from
Flame.
this.
A little bit different, right? This I should say my pseudonym works all the time. That guy is doing great. But I've got quite a few books coming up. I'm pretty much booked for the next 4 months.
Mm.
So actually, yeah, I think officially I'm booked every week, minus like 1 week I'm taking off for my mom's 70th birthday in late May. But aside from that, I'm working till yeah through July. Yeah, and actually, I luckily I didn't have to cancel this interview because I booked a TV shoot this week. I was on a Western, which explains my hipster mustache that I have right now. And yeah, I worked yesterday, and then I work in a couple more days, and luckily I had no conflicts today. But yeah, I'm always working, which I love. And audiobooks have been so great too, because as an actor, I don't really ever have any downtime. I'm always working on something. Even if I have lulls of being on set. I mean, the last time I was on set was, I don't know, 3 months ago. And so having audiobooks, I'm always working. I'm always keeping my tools sharp. And I do love that audiobooks are so different from other forms of acting. It's just such a different process. I mean, it's long form narration. Like as I said before, you're never going to be off book for an audiobook, but you can do your prep. It's also a huge challenge for audiobooks because not only is it a marathon to narrate a book and then take maybe a day off and then rest and then get back to work on another book, but you're playing all the characters, including the female characters, which would never happen in animation or on camera. And so it's really a way to stretch your acting ability. And I will say audiobooks have helped me on camera as well because I don't overthink things. I don't get in my head when I'm on set. It's just trust your instinct, and you might only get one take on camera. I think people think, oh, we'll get like 3 or 4, 5 or 6 or a dozen takes. You might not. I've worked on things where they gave you one take, they were satisfied, they moved on. And so you really have to trust your instincts. And most of audiobooks, you're getting my first take. And that's kind of a relief. That's really been a huge help as an actor. I just trust myself, trust my instincts, give my best take or my best attempt first, and then you move on and you just kind of put things behind you. And it's been very, very helpful. Again, I think audiobooks have helped me on camera. I think on camera and on stage has helped me in audiobooks. Just one hand shakes the other.
Yeah.
When it comes to performance.
Well, since both of you guys are going to be very, very busy for the foreseeable future, let's talk about where people can find you, new releases, things coming up, that sort of thing. Preston, how about you? Where should they follow you or find you?
The best place, hands down, for people to follow me is on Instagram, and it's just at Preston Geer. It's my name. It's at PrestonGeer. So Preston Geer. Everyone thinks it's Preston Greer. I don't know why. Since the last 10 years, everyone calls me Preston Greer. It's Geer. But at Preston Geer is the best place to find me. And in terms of releases, you can see my most immediate audiobook releases either on Audible. They usually have books coming up. I think they go about a month in advance. So you'll see books that are coming out in the next month. So that's a great place to find new books I'm working on. Or you can go on, right now, I'd say you could also check out my profile on Tantor, Tantor Audio or Tantor Media on their website, or Podium Audio as well. You can go on their website and see what I'm working on as well. Although now that I say that, I don't know if Preston Geer is working on Podium. I think my pseudonym is working on Podium. But if you can find my pseudonym, that'll be a fun little game that the listeners can play.
Right.
Match my voice. There. Right.
Good. Okay. And Stephen, how about you? Where can people find you, watch for new releases, follow you, that sort of thing?
So the easiest way they can find my releases and information about me and my career is through my website at srwatts.com. That's srwatts.com. And you'll be able to find links to where every major platform where you can purchase my book, like Spotify and Audible and even Amazon, and Barnes and Noble. And you'll be able to find social media links to places like TikTok and Instagram. And I'm currently working on developing new social media content for other channels. And so as I develop them and create new accounts, you'll be able to find the links to those social media accounts as well on there. And so basically my website is the best place to find all that information. And I'll regularly post updates on my career as well through that website.
Wonderful. Well, Stephen and Preston, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you both much success with The Celestial Flame. And Stephen, we'll look forward to books 2, 3, 4, and 5 to complete the series coming soon. So congratulations to both of you on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing/narration journeys.
Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Stacy. Pleasure to talk to you again as well.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.